Chapter 951. Knowles lowered his gaze. A woman appeared before he could say anything. Young Master Knowles. Knowles turned and saw the woman walking over. He frowned and stared at her without moving. The woman smiled. I'm here to get you. Knowles was on high alert and stood in front of Daisy. I've never seen you at my uncle's place. The woman's smile faded a little. You're so smart. Your great-grandma sent me. Daisy understood and walked out from behind him. You must be lying. Uncle Tristan would not let someone come and get him. He would come here instead. Daisy, go back. Knowles pulled her behind him. Daisy looked upset. No, you'll be in trouble. Go back with me. The woman seemed to have lost her patience. Young Master Knowles. Please don't make it hard for me. Knowles was going to leave with her when Daisy suddenly said, I'll come with you. Knowles looked surprised. Daisy? Then his expression turned somber. Enough, go back. Daisy stood in front of Knowles. I'm not afraid of them. I'll protect you. They wouldn't dare do anything when they're at Dad's territory. The woman stared at Daisy. Her job was to bring Knowles back. Then get in the car. Daisy hopped into the car with him. Knowles frowned as he didn't know what to do now that there was one more person. The car drove toward the outskirts of town. Daisy kept her eyes on the view outside as if she was going on a road trip, seemingly ignorant that she was in danger. The driver looked at the woman and seemed to be speaking a foreign language. Why did you bring another person? The woman replied she wanted to follow. We'll get rid of her when we get there. Daisy didn't understand what they were saying. When she turned around, she saw that Knowles was looking annoyed, so she whispered. Are they talking about me? Daisy showed the wristwatch intentionally and whispered into his ears. One if my GPS shows that I'm out of the city, Dad will realize and come save us. Knowles looked at her in surprise. The car finally parked in front of a row of villas along the beach. A few cargo ships were docked along the shore, the big space filled with crates. That was the port of Bassburg and also the export route between the city and Octavia. Two men in black grabbed Daisy right after she and Knowles got out of the car. Knowles immediately looked back. Let go of her. He was going to rush forward when two other men in black grabbed him and pinned him to the ground. The woman took a cigarette out of the packet and lit it. Young Master Knowles, you can't even protect yourself, but you're trying to protect her? Knowles' expression changed. His face fell, and he started smiling creepily. Have you found out who she is? If you touch her, the people behind her are not going to let you get out of this. The woman took a drag and turned to the two men in black. Don't blow this up. This isn't our turf. Lock the girl in the black house and let Madam decide. The two men nodded and took Daisy away. Daisy looked back at Knowles and smiled at him. Chapter 952. Knowles was finally let up from the ground and walked toward the villas. In the room, the screen showed an old woman with gray hair grooming a poodle in her arms. The woman walked in, and the other woman standing next to the computer was none other than Zeta Yanov. The woman walked toward the screen. Madam, we brought young Mr. Knowles here, but a little girl followed along. She seemed to be somebody. Madam Knowles paused and looked up, her aged face still not looking friendly. Who is the girl? The woman shook her head and just said that she was a friend from school. Zeta immediately frowned. It's Mr. Goldman's daughter. Why did you bring her along? The woman was stunned. I didn't know who she was. She insisted on coming with Knowles. Zeta wanted to say something, but Madam Knowles cut her off. Humph, you've been trapped. If Tristan involved the Goldmans, it means he knows about you. You need to send Knowles back to Octavia. Since Octavia is under the Cliffords, the Goldmans wouldn't be able to get involved. Zeta and the women nodded. Yes, madam. The video call ended, and Zeta and the woman left the room. They went downstairs and saw Knowles held down on the couch by two men. Knowles knew Zeta and smiled at her. But there were no traces of childhood innocence in his eyes. "Does my uncle know that you betrayed him?" Zeta paused and then frowned while she walked toward Knowles, who was still smiling. "Even if he knows, it is too late." She put out her hand and patted Knowles' head. "Don't worry. I'll bring you to Octavia if you behave." Knowles stared at her. His cute face was prettier than a girl, but it was calm and collected, which didn't match his age. "Ms. Yanov." One of the men in black ran inside. Something seemed to have happened because he was frantic. The woman looked cold. "What is it?" The man said, "The warehouse is on fire, and the girl escaped." Escaping wasn't an issue, but people might notice it once it got out of control if the warehouse was on fire. Zeta said to the woman, "Go take a look." The woman left with some people while the smoke from the warehouse rose to the sky. The roof was burnt black. The few men looked around for something to put the fire out. The warehouse stored flammable wine and cotton-made items. The cotton burned. And the fire only grew with the alcohol. Daisy ran, hid behind a nearby tree, and made a call with her smartwatch as she watched the thick smoke. "Is this 911? There's a fire here, sir. Please come to the seaside township. There are a lot of cargo ships there." After the call ended, she kept her eyes open and hoped that the firefighters would come and save Knowles too. Meanwhile, Quincy sped toward the seaside township in his car with a few cars behind him. Nolan looked at the GPS on his phone and looked worried that girl really kept him on his toes. He said through gritted teeth, "Go faster." Quincy floored it. He suddenly looked behind through the rearview mirror and saw 2 or 3 fire trucks following them. No, they were heading in the same direction. Was there a fire at the seaside township? Chapter 953. Nolan suddenly got a call from Tristan, who asked, "Knowles and your daughter were taken?" Nolan squared his jaw. "It's too late for you to realize now. They're at the port at the seaside township." Tristan mumbled, "The port at the seaside township," he suddenly understood. "No, they're sending them to the Cliffords." Daisy snuck into the villa amidst the chaos and suddenly hid behind a wall. 2 men in black brought Knowles out of the villa, and she started to panic. What should she do? She didn't realize someone was creeping upon her at that moment. Knowles suddenly heard Daisy scream. He turned around and saw a man in black bringing Daisy out under his arms. Daisy struggled but wasn't strong enough to fight him off. "You little rascal, I've finally caught you. Did you start the fire in the warehouse?" the man yelled at her. Daisy wouldn't admit it. "How is your warehouse catching fire any of my business, ah?" She was thrown to the floor. Knowles ran over and helped her up. "Daisy. I thought you left. Why did you come back?" Daisy rubbed her palms and had some soot on her nose. She smiled. "I'd be a coward for leaving you and running away." Knowles was surprised. Zeta walked over with her arms crossed. "Someone is going to notice. Get on the boat." The man pointed at Daisy. "What about her?" Zeta looked at Daisy and smiled. "Bring her along. It won't hurt us." Things would be easier if they had the Goldman's daughter in their hands. Daisy was pushed onto the boat. She kept looking back, expecting her father to show up. The fire truck rushed to the scene to put out the fire while Nolan waited nearby in their car. Nolan looked at the tracker on his phone, and it was moving. He ran toward the port. "Mr. Goldman." A boat slowly left the port, and Daisy was standing on the deck and immediately saw Nolan, who was rushing over. "Dad." She waved at him. "Daisy." Nolan watched while the boat left. And he missed it. His aura was dark. Mr. Goldman, Daisy-Quincy, who had just gotten there, saw the boat sailing away and realized they were too late. Nolan calmed down, but his expression was still terrifying. Get some men and head toward Octavia. But Octavia isn't our turf. The coldness in Nolan's eyes intensified. I don't care. They have Daisy, my daughter. Maisie rushed into Tristan's office when he was having a conversation with someone. The guard didn't manage to stop her and said, Mr. Knowles, this woman kept asking to see you. All right, leave us. Tristan waved and also asked the person he was talking with to leave. He walked to the couch. I guess you found out. Maisie walked forward and took a seat. Mr. Knowles, they have Knowles and Daisy. Right? Tristan didn't look up but instead picked up his teacup. Yes, didn't Nolan rush over? Maisie was extremely calm, weirdly calm. What are they going to do to the children? Tristan's lips twitched. They wouldn't dare do anything in Bassburg. But I can't promise anything once they're out of Nolan's turf and in Octavia. Chapter 954. Maisie's hand grabbed her bag tighter, her eyes piercing. Did you know that Zeta was your mother's spy? Yes. So you just put the children in danger? After a long pause, Tristan raised his head and looked at her. Mrs. Goldman, some things are just out of my control. At first, I was just suspicious about Zeta, and I couldn't confirm whether she was working with me as a spy. I set up what happened on Christmas and found out that she was involved. I admit that I involved Nolan because, in Bassburg, they wouldn't dare to do anything with the Goldmans around, but I didn't expect them to make a move today and bring the kids to Octavia. He wasn't God. Whatever plans he made were within his consideration, and he would do his best to make sure they were carried out. However, he hadn't expected the people to make a move that day. He had sent someone to keep an eye on Zeta and learned that they went to the seaside township, but she wasn't the one who picked up the kids from the school. Thus, he had no idea that the children were taken from school. It was all because someone else was involved. Maisie took a deep breath. You know the Cliffords. Tristan looked mellow. So what if I do? They won't listen to me. Maisie looked at him with the same expression. It's all right. Jackie Clifford is in Bassburg, right? He should know you. I think you'll be able to arrange for me to meet him. On the boat. Daisy and Knowles were locked up in a container. Knowles leaned on the door and turned to look at Daisy. Did you start the fire? Yes. Daisy hugged her knees and placed her chin on them. I wanted to delay them so that the firefighters could save you too once they arrived, but it was too late because they took you away. Knowles smiled. Aren't you afraid that the police will arrest you for starting a fire? I did it to save you because there was no one around. Daisy pouted. Then her stomach started growling. Knowles put down his bag and took out a pack of cookies. Take this. Daisy smiled and took the food. Thanks, Nolly. She opened the packaging and looked at him. What are you having? I'm not hungry. His stomach started growling after he said that. So he awkwardly turned his face away. Daisy broke the cookie in half and curled up next to him. Here, take this. Knowles was surprised but took the half cookie. He watched while Daisy finished the cookie in one big bite and lowered his head. Why did you save me? Daisy licked her fingers and said, because we're friends. At the same time, she flashed a bright smile. I have 3 brothers now, Waylon, Colton, and you. Knowles asked, where's your eldest brother? Daisy pressed her lips together. He's in Staslow and will only be back during the winter break. She turned to Knowles. I'll introduce you to him, but don't mistake him for Colton because they look so much alike. Knowles looked sad. That's nice. He leaned against the door and looked forward. I don't have siblings. No brother, just me. My parents were worried that I would be attacked, so they sent me away. I could only live in hiding and keep changing schools and moving around, so I don't have many friends either. Chapter 955. Daisy was astonished and suddenly felt sorry for Knowles. She took a deep breath and patted her chest. "Don't worry, I'll be your friend from now on. My brothers too. You won't be lonely anymore," Knowles smiled. Daisy Goldman was a silly girl but adorable. The night started creeping in. Maisie got out of the car in a brown trench coat with a belt and boots, her long, seaweed-like hair thrown behind her. She didn't have a lot of makeup on, only lipstick. She had 2 bodyguards with her too. The server brought her to the VIP room. Opened the door, and Tristan and a man looked over simultaneously. Jackie, who was about to take a sip of his wine, paused while his eyes fell on Maisie's face. She seemed familiar, so his eyes lingered. Tristan smiled. "Mr. Clifford, this is Ms. Maisie Vanderbilt." "Maise Vanderbilt." Jackie frowned. At that moment, Maisie walked to the table and picked up a glass of wine. "It's been a while. You seem to be an old classmate if I'm not wrong." Jackie seemed to remember something, looked down, and chuckled. "That's why I thought you looked familiar." "Ms. Vanderbilt. Didn't expect you to remember me." Maisie hadn't been closed with Jackie in high school, and he looked very different from when he was in high school. Even their other schoolmates might not have recognized him. He had been an introverted, shy boy in school. But he had gone through a big change. Not only was he an heir of the Cliffords, but he was also a genius in IT and had status. It was hard not to be suspicious that she could recognize him. Maisie smiled. "I was surprised that the Mr. Clifford whom Zeta knew was actually my high school friend." Jackie raised his eyebrow. "You know Zeta?" "Since I know Mr. Knowles, I'd know Zeta too." Maisie swirled the glass she was holding. Jackie looked toward Tristan. "Who are you to this friend of mine?" Tristan smiled. "Relatives, I guess." Jackie squinted. Under the dim lighting, his glasses reflected the light while a pair of dark eyes stayed on her. Maisie maintained her smile. Jackie picked up the glass, swirled the wine around, placed his long arm on the back of the couch, and smiled. "Mr. Knowles, you said you wanted to talk to me about something, and that was why I came over. I guess it wasn't as simple as that." Tristan smiled but didn't say anything after he was exposed. Jackie looked at Maisie, finished the wine, and loosened his grip, letting the glass fall to the table. "Is this a reunion, or is there something more?" Maisie's hair was behind her ears, and her red lips parted. "Something more." He laughed. "Good job for finding me." "You're mocking me." Maisie looked at him, her smile still on. "You're a Clifford, and since I have something that involves the Cliffords, who else could I see if not you?" Jackie's expression was neutral. "Something that involves the Cliffords?" He looked at Tristan, picked up his phone, and stood up. "I don't intervene with the affairs of the family." Seeing that he was going to leave, Maisie looked at the wine in the glass and squinted. "If you could intervene with what happened at the school on Christmas, why can't you get involved in this?" Chapter 956. Jackie stopped in his tracks, turning around. He looked at her and asked, "What do you mean?" Maisie sipped on the wine in the glass, lifted her eyelids to look at him, and said, "My son almost had an accident at school due to an assassination attempt, and your car was at the school that day. Thus, I investigated you." Jackie gnashed his teeth, and his face turned dark. Maisie studied his expression secretly. Apparently, Jackie did not know anything about it. However, there was no way he would not know who could drive his car. She put the glass down and rose to her feet. "Since we used to be classmates, I came here today to have a talk with you. Sincerely." Jackie bumped the back of his teeth with his tongue. He might look like a gentleman on the surface, but only he himself knew that it was nothing more than a disguise. "What if we can't talk it out?" Maisie fixed her gaze on him and said, "If we can't talk this out, then we have to see what the Cliffords can do to solve this matter for you." He walked closer to Maisie and offered her a smile. "Are you threatening me?" Lifting her eyebrows, Maisie responded with a smile of her own and said, "You can put it that way." Jackie stared at Maisie for a long while. The smile on his face slowly broadened as he said, "Seems like I underestimated you when we were still studying at school. How come I didn't realize that you had this kind of threatening skill before?" Maisie chuckled lightly. "People change, and is it not the same with you as well, Mr. Clifford?" Jackie rose to his feet and dusted his suit. "If you want to talk to me, then I'm free tomorrow morning." He slipped a business card that he held in his fingers into her pocket and added, "It's up to you now." He loosened his tie, and his smile disappeared when he turned around. Then, he left without turning his head back. Tristan had been observing from the sideline. He put the wine glass down and said, "Now you know that there is not a single one from the Cliffords that is easy to deal with, right?" Maisie had forgotten about Tristan. She turned around to look at him. "Did you stay here because you didn't want me to be alone with him, Mr. Knowles?" Tristan lifted his head and replied, "Now that you know what Jackie is, I suggest you drop your thought if you think you can get any information from him." When he was about to leave, Maisie called out to him, "Thank you very much, Mr. Knowles, for the things that you did tonight, as well as your suggestion. But for my daughter's sake, I think I know what I should do." Tristan was stunned. His face turned slightly gloomy before he resumed walking and left. At Octavia. In the Clifford manor. A servant stopped outside of the study room and knocked on the door. "Elder Master Clifford." After he got his permission, the servant pushed the door and walked into the study room. The study room was filled with books, brushes, and paintings. It was decorated in antique style, and an old man was sitting behind the desk. He was holding a brush in his hand, and he asked without lifting his head, "What's the matter?" The servant replied respectfully, "Madame Knowles has brought young Master Knowles to Octavia." The old man stood up straight and dipped the brush in paint. As he continued to draw on the paper, he said, "Just settle them down somewhere else and inform them to have someone pick them up as soon as possible. I don't want to have this kind of trouble on my home turf." The servant said hesitantly, "But," the old man lifted his head. "But what?" The servant lowered his head and replied, "They didn't only bring young Master Knowles along. They also mistakenly kidnapped the youngest daughter of the Goldmans." Thomas put the brush down and said sternly, "The Goldmans? Why did they involve the Goldmans in this?" He waved his sleeve and put his hands behind his back. "Where are the two kids now?" "They're currently in your wine cellar," the servant replied. A stretch Lincoln limousine was parked near the wine cellar. The wine cellar was located in a remote area, and it was also the same place he used to produce wines. The black-clad man guarding outside walked forward and greeted him. "What brought you here at this late hour, Elder Master Clifford?" Chapter 957. Thomas replied expressionlessly, "I just came here to take a look." Zeta and the woman came out of it when he was heading toward the wine cellar. The moment they saw Thomas, Zeta bowed to him and greeted, "Elder Master Clifford. I'm really sorry for the trouble I caused you." "Humph, so you guys know that you're causing me trouble too." Thomas's face was dark. "How could you get the Goldmans into this?" That woman replied in a low voice, "You can't blame us on that, Elder Master Clifford. It was the little girl herself who came with us. We also thought that the people from the Goldmans wouldn't act rashly with that girl in our hands." Thomas glanced at her and said, "You people from East Winston have seriously underestimated the Goldmans. Have you ever heard of the things they did in Stosslow?" Zeta and the woman lowered their heads in silence. After all, they really had no idea how big of a trouble they had caused. Zeta opened her mouth and said, "We'll send the girl away tomorrow." Thomas did not say anything. At that moment, Daisy poked her head out through the window. "Hey, we're very hungry. We haven't eaten anything yet." Thomas looked toward the window. A little girl was standing at the window, and she looked rather upset. Perhaps she had inherited all the good genes from her parents, as she was exceedingly good-looking at her age, especially her eyes. They reminded him of someone. "I'm sorry, Elder Master Clifford. We forgot to prepare dinner for them. I'll go now," before Zeta could finish her sentence. Elder Master Clifford spoke. "Wait." Zeta looked at him dumbfoundedly. He said, "Have them prepare more food for them. They are kids, after all. No matter what Madame Knowles asked you to do, you have to listen to me, since you're on my property now." Zeta did not say anything in return. After all, Madame Knowles had indeed told them to listen to Thomas when they were here. The bodyguard brought the scrumptious dinner into the room, stunning Daisy. Her mouth was wide open as she said incredulously, "Wow, there is so much delicious food." Knowles frowned. "Why are they being so nice to us?" When he saw Daisy was going to eat the food, he raised his hand to stop her. "Don't eat." He took a glance at the door and added, "They might have put drugs in the food." "Huh?" Daisy was stunned. She put the fork down. But she couldn't resist the temptation of food and swallowed her saliva. "Nolly, are they trying to poison us or kill us with hunger?" Knowles did not know what to say as well. When Thomas heard what Daisy said, he suddenly let out a boisterous laugh, causing both of them to turn their heads and look at the old man that appeared from the door. Blinking her eyes, Daisy asked, "Who are you?" Thomas was very interested in Daisy. He looked at her and replied, "I'm the one who prepared the food." "Do you think I'm going to poison you too?" Knowles said without any expression, "There is no way you guys would treat us so nicely." Thomas spun his head to glance at Knowles. He did not have a good impression of the Knowles, so he did not like him either. However, he did not know why. But he felt attached to the little girl when he first saw her. "If it hadn't been for her, I wouldn't care even if you died from starvation." Daisy cocked her head. "Because of me?" "Why?" Thomas chuckled, "Because I like you." "I don't like you. I have my own grandpa. And I can't have another grandpa anymore," Daisy said truthfully. She thought Thomas would get angry at her, but surprisingly, he laughed even louder. "You have a lot of guts." As expected of a descendant from the Goldmans. Daisy blinked her eyes and asked in surprise, "You know who I am? So does this mean that you know my dad too?" Chapter 958. Thomas shrugged, "I don't know your father. A sea separates your father and me, so what's the point for me to get to know your father?" Daisy curled her lips. Seeing that both of them were still reluctant to eat the food, Thomas frowned and added, "Don't worry. There is no poison in the food. If you don't want to die of starvation, then eat." After Daisy heard what Thomas said, before Knowles could do anything, she picked up a piece of meat and popped it into her mouth. Knowles was rendered speechless. How could this silly girl eat so much in other people's places? Thomas watched as Daisy wolfed down the food. Not only did she not throw a fit, but she also dared to talk back at him. He did not know why, but he could not dislike this little girl. It was a strange feeling for him. He found it so amazing that he could not help but pay attention to this strange little girl. Thomas asked, "Girl, what's your name?" Daisy was holding a drumstick in her hand. Her mouth was oily as she replied, "I'm Daisy." "Daisy," Thomas mumbled and nodded. "What a nice name." Daisy suddenly fixed her gaze on him and asked, "Sir, why are you working with those bad guys?" Thomas was stunned. He frowned and replied to her with another question. "What if I told you that I'm one of the bad guys?" Daisy replied while munching on the drumstick, "If you were a bad guy, would you still give us so much good food?" He chuckled. "Of course. I'm going to fatten you up and sell you off." Daisy was stunned. And she had the urge to throw the drumstick in her hand away. Thomas felt he should stop teasing the girl upon seeing her expression. He slowly rose to his feet and said, "All right. I'm just kidding. I won't sell you off. After you've eaten your fill, you should rest." After Thomas had gone away with his men, Daisy approached Knowles and said, "See? I told you they wouldn't do anything to you when they learned my identity and who my father is." Knowles was rendered speechless. "It's because you're lucky that that old man took a liking to you. Otherwise, I wouldn't be surprised even if they threw us into the sea." That being said, he had to admit that Daisy indeed had the ability to make people want to get close to her, including him. If not, he wouldn't have wanted to get closer to her when he first met her back then. The next day, at Bassburg, the bodyguard drove the car to the hotel's parking lot. Maisie contacted Jackie, and she looked at her phone in silence for a long while when she saw the room number he had sent her. "Damn it. This guy must be up to no good for asking you to come here. Let's go up," and Maisie kept her phone away and interjected before the bodyguard could finish his sentence. "If something is about to happen to me, I'll call you guys. Then you'll come up to back me up." She opened the door and got out of the car. One of the bodyguards followed after her and said, "But ma'am, we can't explain to Mr. Goldman if he hurts you." Maisie stopped in her tracks, turned her head around, and smiled. "Don't worry. He won't have the chance." The bodyguard watched as Maisie walked away. He pulled out a cigarette and lit it up. "Is it fine we let ma'am go meet him alone?" Another bodyguard in the car let out a sigh and said, "That's because you haven't seen her in action yet. Anyway, let's just put our trust in her." When Maisie came to room 8206, she sprayed the perfume on her wrists and rang the doorbell. Soon, Jackie opened the door. It seemed to her that he had just gotten up from his bed as he was still wearing his bathrobe and had not put on his glasses yet. "You really came." Maisie smiled and replied, "We made a deal last night to talk." Jackie moved to the side to make way for Maisie. When he saw that she was not moving, he laughed and fixed his belt. "What? Are you not coming in?" Maisie gazed fixedly at him and walked into the room. Jackie closed the door and turned his head around to look at her. Chapter 959. Maisie stood in the living room and looked around before walking toward the couch and taking her seat. "Why don't you go get yourself changed first, before we start our conversation, Mr. Clifford?" Jackie walked toward her and sat down next to her, seemingly wanting to get closer to her. "I think what I'm wearing is fine." Maisie lifted her head and smiled meaningfully. "It seems to me that you're not going to have a conversation with me for tricking me into coming here, Mr. Clifford." Sniffing on the fragrance of her hair, Jackie twirled a strand of hair around his finger and asked, "Then why did you still show up?" Maisie pulled her hair away from his finger and rested her elbow on the back of the couch. She looked extremely charming as she smiled alluringly at him. "If you don't want to talk, I'll make you talk, Mr. Clifford." Jackie pressed his lips close to hers. She stopped his incoming lips with her palm and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this, Mr. Clifford? You're wearing perfume?" Jackie dragged her into his arms, and desire began to burn in his eyes. "It seems to me that you've changed a lot after all these years. I didn't realize you were so seductive in the past." Maisie lifted her eyebrows and offered him a mysterious smile. "Really? Are you not worried about losing your head over lust and inviting a wolf into your house?" Jackie lifted her chin and said, "I'm willing to die if that wolf is you." Just when he was about to kiss her, he felt groggy, and his vision turned blurry. He was stunned and looked in astonishment at Maisie, who was gradually becoming two figures in front of him. "You dash," before he could finish his sentence, he fell on Maisie. Jiangxing pushed him away and rubbed the residual drug in the palm of her hand onto his bathrobe. Suddenly, the doorbell rang and a voice rang outside. "Mr. Clifford? Mr. Clifford?" Maisie pinched her nose and shouted, "Stop shouting. Mr. Clifford is sleeping. If you wake him up, he'll kill you." "I'm sorry for the interruption, please take care of Mr. Clifford." The man walked away when he heard a woman's voice from the room. She went to the restroom to clean her hand and pulled her phone out to make a call to her bodyguard. Come to room number 8206 immediately. Don't let anyone see you. Jackie gradually opened his eyes and woke up. He could vaguely see a figure standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window until he was fully awake. When Maisie heard some noise, she shook the wine glass in her hand and slowly turned around. You're finally awake. Mr. Clifford. Maisie, you, he wanted to sit up but found himself tied to the bed. How could you set me up? Sniffing on the red wine in the glass, Maisie replied without any expression, I had to do it. You tricked a weak woman like me into coming to the hotel to look for you. Not only that, but you also wanted to do that to me. Naturally, I had to do this to keep my chastity. Jackie replied exasperatedly, you already have 3 kids, and you still want to talk about chastity? It seems to me that you don't want to talk about it anymore. Maisie walked to the bed and looked down at him. Of course, I want to. But we're going to do it in a different way. Jackie gnashed his teeth. Let go of me now. It's not good for any of us if things get out of hand. Why should I let go of you? Maisie sat beside the bed, leaned closer, and looked at him. You have slept with women before, but I bet you've never slept with a man before, right? What do you mean? What are you going to do? Jackie's expression changed. Maisie shouted at the door, come in. 4 bodyguards pushed the door and entered the room. One of them was holding a camera, and Jackie's face turned pale when he saw the scene. They're the porn stars that I hired with a lot of money. They won't care if you're a man or not. Do you want to watch the live video from last time? Maisie grinned. She stood up, took the camera, opened that video, and placed it in front of Jackie. When Jackie saw the video, his blood turned cold and froze. He was so infuriated that his entire body was shaking. Are you mad, Maisie? Do you know who I am? How dare you do this to me? Chapter 960. Maisie chuckled, shrugged, and said nonchalantly, why not? It would be best if the Cliffords came straight at me. Everyone in Bassburg knows that you, Mr. Clifford, are a playboy. If the video of you sleeping with a man gets out, it would only bring disgrace to the Cliffords. I'm not afraid of anything, so do you think I'd be afraid of you and your family? You're breaking the law. The smile disappeared from her face as she said gloomily, we can talk about that later. All of you. Take off his clothes. The 4 bodyguards were reluctant to do it, but they had no other choice. Just when they went closer to Jackie, he shouted, wait. His forehead was filled with cold sweat as he breathed heavily. Don't you want to talk to me, Maisie? So what is the thing that you want to talk about? Maisie waved her hand and asked them to step down. She leaned closer and cupped his chin with her hand. You were the one who asked Zeta to drive the car. Yes, he replied before adding. But I don't really know what they're doing in that car, and I don't get involved in what they're doing. How well do you know about the Knowles? Maisie looked at him and asked again, stunning him. It took him a while before replying. What is your relationship to the Knowles? Maisie smiled coldly and said, it's none of your business. Since you guys dare to do that to my daughter, I'll make sure none of you can get out of Bassburg alive. Jackie sucked in the air through his teeth. He had been too careless and had underestimated Maisie. He had been under the impression that Maisie, even though she was his former classmate, was just a woman who was willing to be at his mercy for the sake of her children. She indeed was different from those women that approached him. Her main objective in seducing him with her beauty was to threaten him as well as to knock him out. She had come prepared for what she was going to do. He did not expect that the once innocent and frail high school classmate would turn out to be such a dangerous woman. That being said, he still felt that she was a little too inexperienced. He calmed himself down and chuckled, I don't know much about the Knowles. Even if the Cliffords meddle with their affairs, it doesn't mean I do. When Maisie did not say anything, he grinned again and continued. But I suggest you let go of me first. My men are all in the room next door. They will be suspicious when they see that I haven't come out for so long, and you don't want to get thrown into jail, right? Maisie was stunned for a few moments before she laughed. She rose to her feet and crossed her arms in front of her chest. How many people are there in the room next door? The smile on Jackie's face froze, and the doorbell rang again before he could say anything. When Jackie was about to shout, a bodyguard pulled a gun out and pointed it at his head, stunning him once again. The bodyguard then cocked the gun, and Jackie's face turned ashen pale. Maisie tilted her head and lifted her eyebrows at her. His phone rang, and the bodyguard took it. He gestured to him to answer the phone, and Maisie, who was playing with her finger, said, "I suggest you talk carefully. After all, bullets don't have eyes." The bodyguard put the phone next to Jackie. The man on the other side of the line asked, "Are you not up yet, Mr. Clifford?" Jackie glared at Maisie and replied, "Not yet." That man asked again, "Is there anything wrong?" "Nothing. I'm tired. I'm hanging up." The bodyguard then hung up the call. Standing at the end of the bed, Maisie looked at him and shrugged. "Can we talk now, Mr. Clifford?" Jackie stared at the ceiling and replied, "What do you want to know?" Maisie walked to the side, sat on the chair, and picked up the wine glass. "The relationship between Madame Knowles and your family." Jackie gnashed his teeth and answered, "I'm not very clear about it. All I know is that Madame Knowles and my grandfather have known each other for a long time. Madame Knowles wanted to get revenge on the Knowles, and my grandfather helped her from the dark. However, aside from my grandfather, neither my father nor I were allowed to participate.